Speaking of the U.S. Army Transport, U.S. 18 Dorchester, on 3rd February, 1943. And here we have in front of us some things that remind us of that. You'll see on the altar that there are several things here that point to what happened that night. In the center before the altar is an original World War I footlocker, and one of our 4 chaplains actually served originally in World War I, and then was inspired to enlist again to become an officer in World War II. And set on top of that is an original life preserver that is dated 1942, and it is from the wreck that night. And it was given to a survivor that I met who went by the name Peter. Peter was not his actual name, but that's the name that he said his family called him ever since he came back from his World War II duties. And I asked him, okay, so why did everyone just start calling you Peter when you were like 21 years old? And he said, well, you read the Bible about when Jesus was out walking on the water and Peter went out and he was drowning. And then Jesus offered him life, right? And I was like, you're giving me goosebumps. This was the life preserver that was handed to Peter by one of the chaplains on that night. This is the original life preserver that was handed to him. And he doesn't know which one it was. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. There was no lights. The lights went out when they got hit by a torpedo, which was completely black, except for some flares going off later on. But he knows that one of the chaplains handed it to him. He doesn't know if it was one of the ones they took off of themselves or one of the ones that they originally were pulling out of the lockers that they had found until they ran out and then gave up their own. But either way, this was handed to him by one of those 4 chaplains who didn't keep it for themselves, but gave it to Peter and gave him life. Still has the original light on it. The red light that's on it still works. Those lights were turned on when they went in the water, and the survivors recount that when they looked out from the water line, there's just a sea of red lights. From all the people who had gone into the water, there were 900 people aboard the Dorchester. You see, in front of you, the 5 service flags. There are 6 services now with the Space Force, but these are the services that were in World War II. The Air Force was not present in this individual event that night, but the Navy did plan the routes of the convoys, including the one that was taken that night in the North Atlantic. The Army was represented by all 4 of the chaplains, as all 4 of them were Army chaplains. The Coast Guard was actually providing security with their Coast Guard cutters around the convoy that night in the North Atlantic. Although there was no actual Marine force officially present, one of the chaplains, the Methodist pastor, who was a chaplain present there, George Fox, the one who had originally served in World War I, had served as a U.S. Marine in World War I. And so they are probably all of them represented in these flags. And in front of you, you'll also see a display of some of the medals that relate to these chaplains. They were represented by George Fox getting his World War I service campaign medal right there. In the middle is a Croix de Guerre that Chaplain Fox earned in World War I. And to the far right of the bottom row is the World War II medal for those who served in the war. The second row is an American Defense Medal, which all 4 of them, of course, earned from being present. The Purple Heart is in the middle, in the center, and that was earned not only by Chaplain Fox in World War I, but then, of course, was awarded to all 4 of the chaplains after they were killed in the wreck of the Dorchester. And then to the right of it is a African European Campaign Medal, which all 4 of them earned as a result of where they were at when the ship was sunk. At the very top is a Silver Star, which George Fox earned in World War I. He earned the Croix de Guerre on the bottom center and the Silver Star in 2 different actions in the First World War as a Marine. One when he was observing a soldier out in a mustard gas field he got the French Croix de Guerre for that. And then the Silver Star he earned in 1918 when they were being shelled in an artillery barrage in France, and he helped to aid some people to get them out of the building. He was injured in that, which is where he earned the Purple Heart in that First World War. You also see on the flower stand a medal, and down in front of you a medal, and they are the same medal. One was made in the size that would have been worn on a uniform, and the other one is in a presentation size that was just metal. It's, after the service, you can come forward and look at it. This medal was made for the surviving family members of each of the 4 chaplains. In the investigation that followed after the torpedoing of this ship, the U.S. Army Transport Dorchester, of course, the Purple Heart was recommended and awarded for the chaplains because of what happened to them. But they were also awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, and they were each recommended for the Medal of Honor. But the requisite for the Medal of Honor is you have to be actually being fired at in active combat at the time that you perform the act of heroism. The ship had already been torpedoed and was sinking when they helped organize everyone and saved hundreds of, they saved over 200 lives. But because they weren't being fired at then, they actually weren't eligible for the Medal of Honor. But Congress came up with a solution to that, and they said, well, this is making their own medal. This is their own medal. This is the Chaplain's Medal for Heroism, which has all 4 of their names on the back of it. And they're the only 4 who will ever earn this medal. And so this is really about the highest award that you could ever get. A couple thousand people have earned the Medal of Honor, but only 4 have earned this Chaplain's Medal. And ever will. And to the other side, you see a basket there. In 1948, only 5 years after this wreck, the chaplain's story became so worldwide known that it was recommended that they actually have the images on a postage stamp. And so when it was made, you see a block of 4 of them, 4 uncanceled postage stamps right here at the bottom of this display. And there's a basket full of over 100 of the canceled stamps from 1948. And afterwards, you can take some of them. I don't know what to do with them, but you can take a bookmark at them. I don't know, but they are original 1948 stamps with the image of the 4 chaplains on it as the ship was going down. Finally, we have on this stand, we have a drawing which was made that you see on the front of your bulletin, and that was drawn by our own 12-year-old Sutton Metzer, who has artistic skills, and I asked if he could do some kind of a picture. So you see the original photograph or painting of the 4 of them on the back, and we took that idea, and on the front, he had them on there. If I had thought before he drew it, I would have said to him, hey, leave the faces blank, so that we can put in the people in our lives who have reached out and been our heroes and offered us life. And then that's exactly what he did. And I never asked him to do that. He did a wonderful job, and so we're blessed with this. So that is the symbolism of what you see in front of you. Would you join me now as together we go to the Lord in prayer? Gracious Lord, we thank you for your presence and spirit with us tonight. We know that you have never abandoned us. You, Lord, have never abandoned any of your people. And we see that present in the story of the 4 chaplains and what they did in the spirit of Christ that night, 80 years ago this evening. We ask you then to bless us, that as we listen to their story, that we leave here this evening and we take with us the life of Christ, the spirit in what they did. We pray this in Jesus' matchless name. Amen. Today, February 3rd, is designated as National 4 Chaplains Day, a special day to honor 4 specific heroes from World War II and recognize their acts of self-service during a fateful night off the coast of Greenland
in an area that the Navy had dubbed as Torpedo Alley, a treacherous stretch of the North Atlantic filled with Nazi submarines. The U.S. Army transport ship, the USAT Dorchester, was a cruise ship originally, designed to hold 300 people, travelers, that had been repurposed to serve during wartime. It was carrying 902 military personnel, merchant marines, and civilians. At 1 o'clock in the morning on February 3rd, 1943, a German torpedo tore a massive hole in the ship. The ship went completely dark. Sleeping soldiers woke up in a whirl of disorientation. Survivor Michael Walsh described the scene in no greater glory as the lights went out and steam pipes broke and there was screaming. Then the bunks 3 to 5 decks high went down like a deck of cards. Those who were awake scrambled to upper levels to reach a lifeboat. Survivor Walter A. Beckholt remembered, "I was thrown against the ceiling and then landed on the floor. By the time I was recovering my senses, the ship was already tilting. I grabbed for the door, which hadn't jammed as of yet, and I walked out on deck, realizing I didn't have a life preserver. I went back into the room to get it. As I returned to the deck, they all seemed to be yelling, crying, and trying to get to their lifeboats. Most of the lifeboats were frozen solid or broken in the process of trying to get them loose. On board were 4 chaplains, all lieutenants. Only a few months previous, the Reverend George L. Fox, Methodist pastor, the Rabbi Alexander D. Good, Father John P. Washington, Roman Catholic priest, and the Reverend Clark V. Poling, pastor in the Reformed Church in America, had become friends and ministerial colleagues during military chaplaincy training. In the whirlwind of panic on the ship, the 4 chaplains handed out life vests to the terrified young men. Refusing to take places on the lifeboats, they helped as many soldiers as they could to escape the sinking ship. As the supply of life vests ran out, each of the chaplains gave their own to 4 soldiers who were without. Tragically, only 2 of the 14 lifeboats were successfully deployed. The Dorchester sank in less than 20 minutes. Witnesses report that the chaplains said prayers and sang hymns, linking arms as the ship was sinking. Dorchester survivor James Eardley said, "We saw the 4 chaplains standing arm in arm, like they were looking up to heaven, you might say. Then the boat took a nosedive, went right down, and they went with it." Another survivor had a similar recollection. "As I swam away from the ship, I looked back. Some flares had lit up," engineer Grady Clark testified. "The bow came up high, and she slid under. The last thing I saw, the 4 chaplains were up there praying for the safety of the men. They had done everything they could. I did not see them again. They themselves did not have a chance without their life jackets. Of the 902 passengers, only 230 survived. John Ladd, a survivor, said that seeing the chaplain's selfless actions was the finest thing I have seen or hope to ever see this side of heaven." In 1948, a postage stamp was released in their honor. In 1960, the U.S. Congress authorized the unique creation of the 4 Chaplains Medal and awarded these 4 men posthumously with the recognition. In 1988, a unanimous act of Congress established February 3rd as an annual 4 Chaplains Day. There are numerous stained glass memorials, plaques, paintings, and sculptures to their courageous act found at places such as the Pentagon and West Point. Excuse me. Survivor Benjamin Epstein stated, "To take off your life preserver, it meant you gave up your life. You would have no chance of surviving." They knew, those chaplains knew, they were finished, but they gave it away. Consider that. Epstein said, "Over the years, I've asked myself this question 1,000 times. Could I do it?" No, I don't think I could do it. Just consider what an act of heroism they performed. Would you stand, please, and together we'll sing hymn 700 found in your hymnals. Please be seated. As we were choosing who would participate and trying to think where the Spirit was leading best in our readers of the biographies tonight, I was led by the Spirit to look and see what the Lord had given us already amongst us in our congregation. Here we have a Jewish rabbi, Alexander Good, and a Reformed chaplain, Clark Poling, Catholic priest, John Washington, George Fox, already a recipient of the Purple Heart in World War I. And then I look, and in our congregation we have Sari, who was raised Jewish, and Ed, who was raised in the Reformed Church, and Mary Claire, who was raised Catholic, and Danny Puente, who is a Purple Heart recipient with the U.S. Army. And the Spirit provided. Amen. So the story of Chaplain Alexander Good is told by Miss Sari Mess. Thank you, sir.
I light this candle in memory of Chaplain Alex Good. To the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you may be the world. This is a story of Chaplain Alex Good, born in Brooklyn, New York, and spent his formative years in Washington, D.C. He was an avid fan of baseball, had a knack for bringing out the positivity in others, and was a son to a rabbi. Yes, just as many of us, he followed in the footsteps of his father, a loving and intelligent man. His academic career continued at Hebrew Union College in 1937, and 3 years later, he earned his Ph.D. from Johns Hopkins. The experience that we have shape our hearts and our minds. Rabbi Good was no different. Growing up in a Jewish family, there was love in the home. But out in the world, he faced anti-Semitic remarks. Many people thought of World War II as the European war, not our problem. For Alex Good, it was very personal indeed. He applied to be a Navy chaplain in January of 1941, but was only accepted after the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor. During active duty, he was chosen for the chaplain school at Harvard, where he met Chaplain Washington, a Catholic priest. They were reunited on a secret mission along with 2 other chaplains, a Methodist and another Protestant. It almost sounds like a joke, doesn't it? But this was no laughing matter. Chaplain Alex Good understood that connecting with over 900 soldiers and sailors would be a daunting task, but he took one step at a time. Was he there for an unknown top-secret mission and nothing more? Soon it was apparent that God had a plan for the chaplains, just as he has a plan for each of us. His experiences being called Jew boy connected with those who were judged not by their faith, but by the color of their skin. It started with talking with one person during mealtime, then a piano concert starring one of his fellow chaplains, ecumenical services, and later baseball games. Yes, baseball games. In time, everyone was called back to board the Dorchester, and the 4 chaplains were given news about the mission. Chaplain Good declared, "God, we give you thanks and praise to you. You hold our lives, our futures, our legacies. Give us faith to worship you always with joy in our hearts." This is just like Romans 5, verses 1 through 5. But we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into the hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. The realization of their fate came with a torpedo attack. Life jackets and boats were scarce, and yet the 4 chaplains' faith never wavered. In fact, they ministered to their brethren and without hesitation gave up their own life jackets and held each other's hands, praising God until their last breath. Shalom Aleichem, peace unto you.
Amen. Thank you, Sarah. The story of Chaplain Clark Poling is told by Mr. Ed DeRamo.
I light this candle in memory of Clark Vanderstaal Poling. Clark Poling was born in Columbus, Ohio, August 7, 1910, the son of a Baptist minister. Clark Poling excelled in athletics and during high school, especially football. But when it came time to go to college, he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and become a minister. He first enrolled at Hope College in Holland, Michigan, and then transferred to Yale Divinity School, where he graduated with his Bachelor of Divinity in 1936. He was ordained in the Reformed Church in America and served first in the First Church of Christ in New London, Connecticut, and then as pastor of the First Reformed Church in Schenectady, New York. He married Betty Jung, and they had 2 children, a son named Clark, and then a daughter who was actually born 3 months after Clark perished at sea. With the outbreak of World War II, Poling decided to enter the Army, and his father, who served as a chaplain during World War I, told him that chaplains risk their lives just as much as regular soldiers do. And with that knowledge, he decided to become a chaplain. He applied and was accepted on June 10, 1942, as a chaplain with 131st Quartermaster Truck Regiment, reporting to Camp Shelby, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, in June 25. Later, he reported to Army Chaplain School at Harvard, where he would meet Chaplains Fox, Good, and Washington. Just as a side note, the convoy was being screened by 4 Coast Guard cutters, and the cutter that was closest to the Dorchester when it was torpedoed was the Escanaba. This was the smallest of the cutters, only 165 feet long, and the slowest, only being able to do about 13 miles an hour. The Escanaba was commissioned in 1932 and was homeported in Grand Haven, Michigan, until 1941. That happened to be the town where I was born in 1938. So the Escanaba was tied up there at that time. The Escanaba, when Dorchester was torpedoed, the captain headed immediately towards the Dorchester to pick up survivors. But the Commodore of the 4 screening ships ordered it back to its screening station because he was worried that the submarine would be attacking other ships in the convoy. Well, when the soldiers on the Dorchester had to jump into freezing water, they only had about 15 minutes before they would lose consciousness. The Escanaba was not ordered to pick up survivors until 40 minutes after the torpedoing. Fortunately, as Pastor Mack pointed out, each person had a red light on their life jacket. And the people on the Escanaba had developed what we know today as wetsuits, because they often had to get into freezing water. So 3 of the crew members were able to jump in to the water and swim to the bobbing red lights. And if they could determine that the person still had a pulse or was breathing, even though they were unconscious, they would tie a rope on them and they would be hauled back aboard the Escanaba. There were a total of 233, I think, people who survived, and the Escanaba picked up 130 of those. Thank you.
Thank you. The story of Chaplain John Washington is told by Miss Mary Claire Gatch. Thank you, Mary Claire.
I light this candle in memory of John Patrick Washington. John P. Washington was born in Newark, New Jersey on July 18, 1908. He studied at Seton Hall in South Orange, New Jersey, to complete his high school and college courses in preparation for the Catholic priesthood. He graduated in 1931 with an A.B. degree, entering Immaculate Conception Seminary in Darlington, New Jersey, where he received his minor orders on May 26, 1933. He served as a subdeacon at all the solemn masses and later became a deacon on December 25, 1934. He was elected prefect of his class and was ordained a priest on June 15, 1935. Father Washington's first parish was at St. Genevieve's in Elizabeth, New Jersey. He later served at St. Venetius for a year. In 1938, he was assigned to St. Stephen's in Kearney, New Jersey. Shortly after the Pearl Harbor attack of December 7, 1941, he received his appointment as the chaplain in the United States Army, reporting for active duty on May 9, 1942. He was named chief of the Chaplains Reserved Pool in Fort Benjamin, Harrison, Indiana. And in June 1942, he was assigned to the 76th Infantry Division in Fort George Meade, Maryland. In November 1942, he reported to Camp Miles Standish in Taunton, Massachusetts, and met Chaplains Fox, Good, and Poling at Chaplain School at Harvard. I'd like to add what moved me was at the end of the story, one of the chaplains said, "If we can die together, why can't we live together?"
Thank you, Mary Claire. The story of Chaplain George Fox is told by Mr. Danny Pointe.
I light this candle in memory of George Lansing Fox. George L. Fox was born in Lewistown, Pennsylvania, the eldest of 8 children. When he was 17, he left school, lied about his age, in order to join the Marines to serve in World War I. He joined the Ambulance Corps in 1917, assigned to Camp Newton Baker in Texas. On December 3, 1917, George embarked from Camp Merritt, New Jersey, and boarded the USS Huron en route to France. As a Medical Corps assistant, he was highly decorated for bravery and was awarded the Silver Star, Purple Heart, and the French Croix de Guerre. Upon his discharge, he returned to Altoona, where he completed high school. He entered the Moody Bible Institute in Illinois in 1923. He and Isidore G. Hilbert of Vermont were married in 1923 when he began his religious career as a preacher in the Methodist faith. He later graduated from Illinois Wesley Wesleyan University in Bloomington. Served as a pupil in Rye, New Hampshire, and then studied at the Boston University School of Theology, where he was ordained a Methodist minister on June 10, 1934. He served in parishes Thetford, Union Village, and Gilman in Vermont, and was appointed the state chaplain and historian for the American Legion in Vermont. In 1942, Fox volunteered to serve as an Army chaplain, accepting his appointment on July 24, 1942. He began active duty on August 8, 1942, the same day his son Wyatt enlisted in the Marine Corps. After Army chaplain school at Harvard, he reported to the 411th Coastal Artillery Battalion at Camp Davis. He was then united with Chaplains Good, Poling, and Washington at Camp Miles Standish in Taunton, Massachusetts, where they prepared to depart for Europe aboard the Dorchester.
Thank you, Danny. Would you stand, please, as together we sing hymn 77, How Great Thou Art.
Oh,
be seated. And now we get to what they call the rest of the story. Through the efforts of David Fox, who is the nephew of the Methodist chaplain George Fox from the Dorchester, the memory of the four chaplains has been preserved. Their story continues on. In 1996, Fox rented a video camera and attempted to interview as many Dorchester survivors as possible. He ended up meeting 20 of the 28 known survivors then at the time. According to Fox, the first sergeant of the ship, Michael Warish, reported that the four chaplains had a remarkable camaraderie. He said, "These men were always together. Remember, this was 1943, he said. Protestants didn't talk to Catholics back then, let alone either of them talk to a Jewish person." Fox told America in World War II a story, a documentary that was being made. He said, "And yet, here they were, always together, and they loved each other." The men said it didn't matter which service they went to, that the chaplains always made all of them feel welcome and cared for. They were remarkable for 1943, way ahead of their time. Through contacts in Germany, Fox also reached out to the three remaining survivors of the German submarine U-223 that had fired the torpedo. U-223 had also been destroyed, and a majority of the crew lost in World War II. Fox said, "When I was interviewing the U-boat crew, they just would cry. The men had never told their families this story about what happened to the Dorchester before. They realized that when they hit that ship, there were men dying, hundreds of them. At first, they had cheered in the very first moment, and then it just got very silent, and they had felt terrible after that. These were Germans. They weren't Nazis. They were just young boys, 17, 18, 19 years old, forced to do it. Or they would have been shot pretty much like in that movie, Das Boot. The U-boat crews did what they were ordered to do. That didn't mean that they liked it." Through a notable reconciliation effort made by Fox and the Immortal Chaplains Foundation in 2000, survivors of the Dorchester met with the surviving crew of the German submarine. Can you believe that? The men from U-223 had also known loss. The German submarine was sank a year after they had sunk the Dorchester. Remarkably, 2 surviving German submarine veterans arrived in Washington, D.C. for a 2000 memorial ceremony, and they wept openly after visiting the Holocaust Memorial Museum. A small group of both the American and German survivors shared fellowship, and then were invited together to the nearby home of Teresa Good, chaplain, the then 88-year-old widow of Rabbi Alex Good, who had died on the Dorchester. She shook the Germans' hands and accepted their expressions of regret for her husband and for her suffering, reported the New Yorker magazine. When the room was silent, Gerhard Busk, who had been the executive officer of the submarine U-223, produced a harmonica, raised his hands to his mouth, and blew at a slow, warbling rendition of Amazing Grace. Everyone clapped. Then the room lapsed back into silence. Busk returned again to the United States in 2003 to speak at a ceremony on the 60th anniversary of the Dorchester's sinking. He said, "We, the sailors of U-223, regret the deep sorrows and pains caused by the torpedo sinking." He said, "Wives lost their husbands, parents lost their sons, and children waited for their fathers in vain. I once more ask forgiveness, as we had to fight for our country, just as your soldiers had to do for theirs." Busk concluded by imploring the gathering to follow the example of the 4 valiant chaplains. He said, "We ought to love when others hate. We ought to forgive when others are violent. He said, I wish that we can say the truth to correct errors. We can bring faith where doubt threatens. We can awaken hope where despair exists. We can light up a room with light where darkness reigns. I wish that we can bring joy where sorrows dominate. Would you stand with me now as together we sing our final hymn, which is found in your bulletin, Eternal Father, Strong to Save. Would you join me? Together we pray and receive our saving forth. Gracious Lord, we know that there are times of storms in our lives, and sometimes we feel like we're sinking, yet a hand always reaches out to us. A preserver is always given to us, and somehow we're lifted up from our storms and restored every time by your hand. So let us remember this moment of grace that saved so many from so few. Let us be lifted up from that in our storms. Let us take the light of Christ and bear it gladly to those that we meet throughout this world as they endure their own storms, that they too might see the light that you offer all of us in the darkness. We pray this in Jesus' matchless name, remembering what your Son taught us. Pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine
God. Don't forget that there are things that you can look at on the altar and you can take some steps. God bless you all. Good practice.